I'd really like to share my opinion on every Ultimate Alien design from our Ash's Drawing Matrix Ultimate Overhaul series. If you're not familiar with the series, Ash does new designs for all the series aliens, including redesigning their pre-existing Ultimate forms. Starting off with Ultimate Heat Blast. I like the inclusion of the metal on the design. I like how it's more magma than fire. I think the ideas behind it I really like. The thought process I really like. I don't know about the head mostly. I wouldn't mind if it was maybe a bit more torso heavy. You made it almost kind of like blocks as build. I really would have liked that. Moving on to the Mercury version, I really liked this one. I like the idea of Ultimatrix combating the predators of the world. Makes total sense. I like that this one's poisonous. I like the way it moves around. Feels a bit inspired by a Doc Ock, a Superior Spider-Man, the classic Ultimate Spider-Monkey. Yeah, it's really good. I like the proportions a lot more. I almost wish that the Krag was more like this one. Yeah, it's really strong. I really like how they walk around. The sort of skull symbol, I mean, it's literally his head, but the skull symbol really works. I like the placement of the Omnitrix. I like the body language. I like everything about this. Ultimate Wildmart, yeah, this works really well. It reminds me of more evolved version, less of the classic Wildmart and more of the older Vulpamancers we see. I really like this. The color works. I get that you sort of have to color swap all of them. I kind of don't agree with color swapping every Ultimate, but I suppose that is the general rule of thumb. Yeah, Ultimate Vulpamancer, pretty cool. I really like it. I like the idea of including those extra gills. That really works well. I think proportionately he works well. He feels more ferocious. I love the sort of the whiskers on the chin. I really like that. Ultimate Diamond Head. Okay, this will be the first one that I'm not absolutely crazy about. Again, in theory, I really like this one. I really like the sort of faint pink color reflecting through. I really like it feels more like a crystal than the original Diamond Head, and it's very clearly inspired by Chromasin. Now, I just want to say at this point in the video, I have watched all these videos, but not for quite some time. Right now, I'm strictly talking about the designs themselves, not necessarily the thought processes behind them as much. Now this one's interesting. The Ultimate Accelerate, I really like that it's bulkier. It's such an interesting way to go about it. You'd think maybe, I don't know what element I would add personally. I was going to say maybe flight or something, or making somehow a form of intangibility like the Flash. But yeah, I like the idea that this is sort of like Crash Hopper, where you're really building up the momentum and really hitting something hard. I suppose also sort of like the Flash. I've just realized the previous one was called Leg Day. Featherfoot, yeah, I think this is more sort of what I was thinking of in design-wise. I love the purple energy. I love the build-up kinetic energy. I love how it sort of, the reflection of the purple in the feathers and quills is in the orbs on his feet as well. This is sort of where I would have gone with it, the more dinosaur approach. It's really great. Ultimate Grey Matter, yeah, definitely an interesting take, especially because we see Albedo's ultimate form. This, I like the exposed brain, it makes sense. I like the sort of fins of forearms, if you call it. I like that it levitates. I think the idea of a Brainiac character levitating is great. I think the Ultimate Albedo from memory floats on like a bit of a MODOK style chair, but yeah, this works really well. I think the blue works well with the design. Yeah, really good. Opening the third eye, really interesting. Ultimate Forearms, yeah, this is one of the strongest for me. It reminds me of Muscular from My Hero. I actually think Ash mentions that in the original video, but I really like this. The idea that sort of muscle manipulation, you can generate more arms, you can change your size. It feels quite horrific and quite scary, honestly. The exposed muscle fibers are really intense. I like the blue. I think the blue on forearms is really strong. Even the Omnitrix placing on the shoulder, I really like this design. And the classic sort of outfit with those white stripes. It reminds me of Ben 10,000 a lot, and that's a very good thing. I'd say so far, this is probably the strongest design. Gunk Tank, I really like this. It makes sense. It reminds me a little bit of when Grandpa Max is turned into a bit of a puddle on the floor when Animo transforms him into a sort of a Stinkfly variant. Yeah, really good. The blue works well with the orange. I don't think there's a lot to say. This is just such a horrific... It feels like it would be in the series, really. Yeah, just really great. I love the tail. I love those sort of those pincers. Oh, just everything about this design works really well. This is just such a clear evolutionary path for Stinkfly. Stink Bomb, I like this. It's very interesting. Again, the color palette works great. Reminds me a lot of the sort of forearms Ben 10,000 thing I was talking about before with the clothing design. I really like the clothing on this. Placement of the Omnitrix is really nice. The eyes are interesting. That everything's interesting. I'm not sure about the tail. It's cool. I don't know, I wouldn't have minded, I'm not really sure what I really wanted here, but I like that sort of plasma looking detail in the tail, that's interesting. It's not my favorite of these two. It's a very strong design, but I feel like I was spoiled by Gunk Tank. Ultimate Ripjaws, okay, interesting. I really like the 5-oil design of Ripjaws, it might be my favorite. It's certainly bulkier, it's certainly scarier. I think proportionately it feels slightly off, and again, I like top heavy characters. I love the thick neck, I like the way the shoulders stretch out from that. I can see this being a real weapon in the water. I think the size is one of the big elements of this transformation. Yes, 65 feet. So yeah, I like the idea of making Ripjaws sort of like a megalodon, this real predator of the ocean that sort of The Kraken from the original series would have been scared of this design. It's good. It's not my absolute favorite, but I do like it. And then the RGB variant of this. I love this. This is terrifying. It's really going into how scary Ripjaws was, especially in the classic series. I like that his body sort of dissipates into these little fish, the skeleton exposed elements, that tail that looks like it's been ripped, all the flesh has been ripped off, the anglerfish glow. It's, everything about this. The RGB version is a great way to summarize it. Again, really top heavy, not as big as the previous one, but much more terrifying. I think I have a better chance at surviving the other one than this one, personally. Amazing. Really monstrous. Ultimate upgrade. Great. The sort of nanotechnology. The colour change works really well. It reminds me a lot of Asmith's suit. I'm sure Ash, and please forgive my memory, I'm sure he mentioned that in the video. The greys work really well with the blacks. The build is great. The dust cloud foot sort of solidifying. Yeah, it just works really well. Ultimate Ghost Freak. I really like the colours of this one. I think the body language is fantastic. The sort of scare elements coming out of the original body, swapping it to black instead of white is really interesting. I really like the chest to tail, that sort of plasma feeling that it reminds me a lot of the sort of Ghostbusters streams. I'm sure that's probably very intentional. I think the tendrils coming out of the head is probably the only element I'm not sure about, but otherwise I'm not sure what you do there. I think everything just works in this design. I think the colours are so perfect, everything's so complementary. I've realised it's very Accelerate's colour palette. I really like it. I feel like I've been very complimentary up to this point, and I'm sorry if I've occasionally been just gushing, but I really like a lot of these designs. I have such a personal preference for the Ultimates. But moving on to Ultimate Counterbolt. Okay, interesting. I'd like to see this form curled up in a ball. I suppose you can't really with that length of the tail. I like how rocky it is. I like the sort of metal design. It's sort of... I do have to say, if I'm looking at just the main body of this design, I'm going, great, it's just a nice quick fix of the original Ultimate Counterbolt. The tail is really interesting. Again, proportionally, it almost feels too big, but I think that's sort of a common theme throughout some of these Ultimates with the tails, is they're enormous, but it sort of makes sense that they're these big, bulky creatures. Yeah, it's not my absolute favourite, but the colour palette works well. I think the main body is great. Just something about the tail, I'm just not sure about it. I do like the end of it, though. Ultimate Wildvine. This is interesting. It's much more plant-like. It feels like that sort of torso upwards is the sort of Flower of Venus flytrap, and the body is just ready to grab you. I like the long arms. It works well. I think I may have missed this design when I was watching the original videos, but yeah, I'm just sort of in awe. I like the colours a lot. I think proportionally it really works. It makes sense. I probably would have changed his face slightly, but I'm not sure how I would have done that. I actually wouldn't have minded, and I know this is a very bottom-heavy design, and I'm talking about how much I like the top-heavy designs, but I think I wouldn't have minded if the body was even larger and that sort of torso upwards is even smaller. Ultimate Beowulf. I've got a huge weakness for this character, and this design is fantastic. It's sort of more Egyptian. I love those sort of opening mouths. It reminds me a lot of, I can't remember the name of the Pokemon, but it reminds me of that quite a lot. Everything about this works. The claws are more horrific. Everything feels like you've just put more of what the alien originally was into this. So yeah, and Ultimate Leboan is just fantastic. Again, I love the clothing. Ultimate Scenario. I love this concept. The sort of whirlwind, that sort of gushing wind coming through. It reminds me of the desert. It's scary. I'm not sure about the blue. I love how the bandages are sort of wrapping around and unraveling. The sort of wind underneath him. The smaller head. The sort of reminds me a little bit of post-time Skip Buggy the Clown, the way he's spread out. Ultimate Frankenstrike. Yeah, works really well. Feels horrific. Feels very sort of thrown together, and not in the way the design's thrown together, in the way the body feels thrown together. The sort of that coil in his arm is interesting, and the size of this arm is quite vulgar in this really interesting way. The purple works well. It reminds me of the purple light from the Anor system. Everything's just great here. Ultimate Upchuck. I know there's another Upchuck design. This works really well. I can see it in the series. It just feels like it would just slot in nicely. The extra arms, the sort of bulkier design suits an Upchuck. Not that they physically necessarily always need it, because they sort of have that pocket dimension or whatever it is within them. But yeah, this works really well. He's sort of the way his tail bounces with his torso works really nicely. The extra arms look great. Yeah, I like it, but I know the next version of this is even better. My mistake. This is not my favourite version. The following Upchuck is my favourite version. Yeah, I think this one's called Gutzilla. I like the colour palette a lot. It's interesting. I like the curled tail. Again, this one doesn't feel like it would work quite as well in the series with the way the legs are, but I really love the big mouth. Reminds me of a frog a lot, and then it's got that great tail of those sort of, I don't know what to call them, The sort of scales that are sort of coming out of his sort of chin and on his tail are fantastic. Moving on. This is the Ultimate Upchuck I like. There's something about this. I think it's the body language, the sort of floating, that sort of hypnotizing Poliwhirl. I'm using a lot of Pokemon references here. That sort of Poliwhirl chest design and the gills, just everything about this really works. I like this so much. Ultimate Ditto. Yeah, this is good. It feels cheeky. I think this actually feels a lot like a sort of 5YL design to me. The way the sort of beard's coming off the chin. Again, I like the clothing a lot. I'm a really big fan of the original Ditto design, very clean. The gloves work, the pants work. It's reasonably simple, but I quite like it. Next up we have Ultimate Eye Guy. I really like the color palette for this. I'm not so sold on the design. I think I see the path Arash has taken here, but I'm just not sure. It reminds me a lot of a bat. It reminds me a little bit of the original Ultimate Albedo. It makes sense, but I just don't know about this one. Ultimate Way Big. This makes so much sense. It feels a bit like the creatures from Pacific Rim, especially with the sort of vibrance of that blue coming through. I like the idea that it's very cloudy, and it's because I understand they're born in cosmic storms, and I just think this works really nicely. Ultimate Arctiguana. Yeah, this one makes sense. I like the ice pattern. I like that sort of blue detail running from the eye and along the body. Works really well. Again, the clothing works really well. I really like this sort of Ben 10,000 sort of look to the clothing. It's not my absolute favourite design, but I think it works well for Arctiguana. I actually think it's an improvement on Arctiguana. I think, again, the balance of the weight works really well. That sort of thicker tail and the thicker head and sort of a gullet works really well. Ultimate Buzzshock. Yeah, not my favourite, I'll be honest. Short and simply, the electricity looks good. It reminds me a little bit of the monster from the second Scooby-Doo film, the 10,000 Volt Ghost. I like that sort of skull skeletal pattern with it, where the Omnitrix sort of stretches out into that sort of rib cage. There's elements of this I like, I'm just not sure about it. And then finally we have Ultimate Spitter. Yeah, this makes perfect sense. I don't know what this reminds me of. There's something that this really distinctly reminds me of, but I couldn't quite put it. This is a horrific design. I'm trying to think of what to say here. The fleshy colours work for Spitter. It's horrific. It makes so much sense. It's like a pufferfish with a little, I don't know, just everything about this is disturbing, but in a really reasonably positive way. I like the inclusion of these cylinders and those sort of whiskers on this one, but yeah, it's interesting for sure. And that concludes the Ultimates. Thanks for watching.